for raid in terms of like throughput. It'll
You're
stand out
using
compared to other tanks.
a noise gate, right?
Yeah.
I
Should
think
get
it's a
closer
little
here?
yeah. Get closer to
Am
your
I
mic when you
does
talk.
that sound good now?
Oh
Does that
wow,
sound nice and
that's a
central?
little
Yeah.
okay.
That's
Okay.
perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, I'm just gonna keep it like this.
It is time, guys. We are doing a DK talent tree talk, very much like the Shadow Priest one. I plan to do these one for each class. And it's not just about the talent trees, it's also like DKs as a whole. The idea for these is hopefully Blizzard listens to them and is identified by people that I think are like really bright in the community and really know what they're talking about and give them like feedback. Because I think they're going to need more feedback on these talent trees than anything else because there's just so many specs. And you can already see, especially when they released the Priest one, that stuff that I thought they were philosophically sound on with DK and Druid trees was not true with Priest, and it presented a lot of problems. So as they're like finalizing the other ones before they release them, or just to get the right idea on them, I think it's important to know what exactly those things are. So, all right, let's do it. So for you guys, if you want to introduce yourself, we can start. I'll just do from the top of the videos that I see. Atlas, tell the stream about you, Atlas.
I'm Atlas. I play DK in Liquid. Yeah.
Yeah, for people who are watching, he's played in Liquid and also importantly has tanked for this guild and DPS as both specs for like a very long time. Like I think like 4 years, something like that. It's been a long time.
Hey, everybody, I'm Taeznak, DK Theory Crafter. Been doing theory stuff for Frost and Unholy for, I think, about 3.5, maybe 4 years now. Super fun. I'm sure a lot of you guys know me, but super happy to talk today.
Excellent. And Muffin, I don't think we've actually met before.
Hello, I'm Muffin. I'm a DK enjoyer in Mythic Plus.
Okay, so you're primarily Mythic Plus based. Do you do what specs do you play?
I play all three specs if I need to, but I primarily play Frost in Mythic Plus.
All right, that is cool. And then Dorki, the chat usually knows you, but just for the sake of this probably being a YouTube video, what's your deal?
Hello, I've been playing DK mostly since BFA. Let's say I mostly play M+, and I've been more so Unholy and Blood, more than Frost, but I still play Frost whenever.
I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted you guys on, because I think like Atlas has like a race world first perspective, has played all three specs at a high level. Dorki has played all three specs. Currently, I believe you've cleared the Mythic raid and are primarily a Mythic Plus player, would describe yourself as one. Taeznak has a background, and Muffin both have a background in the Theorycraft community. All right, so we started off the discussion with priests with the big elephant in the room being PI. There's nothing like that quite for DKs, but is there anything about the class before we directly dive into the spec trees that you guys think is either worse than it was before at a previous time in the game and like desperately needs to be looked at, minor tweaks, or like the way that any of the classes play right now that really stick out to you?
I have sort of a hot take, but I'll leave it for later.
Okay, so that sounds like that's real hot.
So you said there's nothing like PI for DKs. I'd kind of argue that Abomination's limb and where it's placed right now is a big issue that we should probably touch on first. Because where it's at right now, like DPS DKs can't really take it without sacrificing so much.
Mm-hmm. That's a great, yeah, because it's something that for people who are watching was added. This expansion has been like DKs since the beginning of time, even like way back when. But something that comes to my mind is Manaroth, right? When you're doing Manaroth in Hellfire Citadel, imagine like not having Mass Grip for that fight. That was back when DPS DKs had it. That was something that, you know, they just needed. And A-Bomb's Limb bringing back or coming to the game kind of brought a little bit of that back and kind of functionally served as a Mass Grip for a lot of the expansion, and has now gotten to a point where it's like a clear DK niche. Like there's absolutely a way you would bring a Death Knight to a fight that they have no reason to be in on defensively as a tank or offensively as a DPS, where that is just too required and too good. So it being at the bottom of that class tree is something we'll probably look at there. But I think I'm actually glad it's staying though. Actually, I'm interested to see how much you have to give up to get there.
Do you want to take a look at one of the general trees I've got set up? Sure.
Yeah, let's do that.
This is a single target Unholy setup, but it'll give you the general idea of what like DPS DKs do in the general tree when you're looking at that side of it. To get down to Abomination's limb in the center row, for an Unholy DK, they'd have to give up either Empower Rune Weapon or Soul Reaper. They'd have to sacrifice one of those rows. And there's no real good option to give them up, because on the Unholy side, you're giving up Soul Reaper and Unholy Bond, which that Runeforge buff is just huge. It's such a DPS loss to give up. And then on the Frost side of things, you're giving up Icy Talons, Runic Continuation, and Empower Rune Weapon. All of which aren't like super required, but the extra resources give all of the specs a lot of leg room to kind of play the spec more fluidly or fill in that downtime, just have more globals in general, and makes the spec feel good. Taking those away just makes the spec feel worse, and doing that to get Abomination Slim just kind of feels bad, man, you know?
Definitely true. I also think it's something where in a lot of these classes, I think Blizzard is having to balance between how many points are you putting on the tree that are just like there to fill out the total amount of points you need to spend, versus a lot of classes being like, okay, well, I don't have as much of those, or a few classes, I don't have as much of those abilities, but I have to make some insanely hard decisions of actually what I want. And it's one thing Blizzard really needs to watch out for is going into next expansion, any class or spec feeling like they're a gimped version of their former selves because they just don't have what was available to them previously is a terrible feeling that they've managed to do most expansions, right? Like I think one of the reasons they're doing an evergreen talent tree is to get away from the crazy borrowed power systems that amplify all the way into the 0.3 patch of an expansion, and then you just lose it and you're like, wow, my character feels literally worse than it was yesterday, but this is a new expansion, I'm supposed to be excited about it. So how do you think in the Blizzard tree, or in this tree specifically, Blizzard would go about fixing that?
Talking about just the general tree?
Just the general tree for now.
Well, I got a hot take, but I want A-Bomb Limb gone entirely as an ability, and I just want Mask Grip back in like the middle of the tree, because they basically serve the same function in terms of like your usefulness to a raid, but like A-Bomb Limb as like a damaging ability is kind of underwhelming unless you're in like some sort of cleave scenario where you have like the perfect amount of targets for it. So like having to pick between unique utility and then putting that at the bottom of the tree and then locking that behind a DPS choice is kind of shitty when you're giving up so much all over the rest of the tree to do so.
Yeah, it would also kind of maybe work thematically too, because you could allow Blood DKs to get their own Mask Grip instead of it being, I'm assuming, on the Blood DK tree. I actually don't remember if it was on the Blood DK tree. And that would be like make it available to both without having to deal with like a damaging function. But I guess my only other concern would be, I think something that they actually did really well in this tree, as especially opposed to Shadow Priest, is they had things that were previously thought to be really problematic in that, oh, you're going to make people go 5 points out of the way to get an extra kick as a healer, or to get a personal cooldown that they've had for like 10 years. But in this, they kind of solved that for all three specs. Like, there's no way you're going into any content where you're not grabbing IBF or Mind Freeze ever. Where you're not missing anti-magic shell or just missing 10% stamina, or you do know what I mean? Like a lot of your stuff that you will always have in all content is there, but that also just begs the question of like how many points on this tree are supposed to be things that you're just picking by default and are there to be there, and it doesn't actually give you any interesting decisions to make. Like outside of A-Bomb's Limb, which we can kind of get back to in a second, because I think I kind of agree with you. Like, where are the decisions you see you all making on a like content to content difference, so like raid to Mythic Plus, I guess, or in even raid single target to AoE, or based on like the kind of utility you'd bring to a fight?
Oh, doesn't seem like anybody wants to talk, so I guess I will. So I just linked another tree in the chat. This is going to be a more AoE specific tree, and you can see a couple differences there. The primary differences would be sacrificing stuff like Soul Reaper and Runic Attenuation, and going for the stuff on the far right of the Unholy Tree, stuff like double Death's Advance, Death Grip, and Death and Decay. So you have 2 charges of that, which is the very bottom right one.
Yeah, that one looks really good.
And then at the top right, the one kind of hanging off, that one gives you extra haste during Death and Decay, which is really cool. As for utility picks, for situations like this, in the dead center of the tree, you have like Death's Advance, Anti-Magic Barrier. You could theoretically give, one or both of those up to grab stuff like Blinding Sleet in the top right. You could grab, Anticipation to get some extra runic power from interrupts, or Proliferating Chill, which actually has a potentially really cool interaction that they haven't confirmed or denied yet, which may be Cold Heart 2-target cleave, which could be really cool. Can't be sure yet, but either way, it's a big 2-target slow, which is really good utility-wise. And if you're going into raids too, you could even potentially give up, if you're Unholy, for example, maybe give up Runic Attenuation on the bottom left to grab Will in the Necropolis, just to give you some extra tankiness below 30%. There's a lot of really cool trade-offs you can make, although I hate to see where a lot of the utility is. So, like, a lot of our movements deep into the tree are cost a lot to get to, like Death's Advance I know you're going down there anyway, but it just kind of feels bad where it is. Same with Wraithwalk being behind like 3% avoidance, I think it is.
Wraithwalk was the weird one. The thing, yeah, but one thing I did like seeing though is seeing as in most content you're going to get anti-magic zone and Death's Advance, seeing DPS DKs kind of for the first time having the option to have the reduced anti-magic shell cooldown is definitely something that would be prevalent in raids. I mean, I remember like we had Atlas like play tank DPS on some fight where he was able to AMS something exactly on cooldown that he wouldn't have been able to as a DPS DK. I think it was it Il'gynoth in Nihilotha?
Il'gynoth, Nihilotha, Jailer on Mythic as a tank.
Yeah, so like just having stuff like that available for a DK is definitely something where I think like among the niches that Death Knights bring to content, AMS is extremely powerful. Like almost no class has something like it for such a low cost. So having that be pretty accessible is good. The thing is though is there are definitely fights where anti-magic zone is basically worthless or actually worthless. So knowing to get that, even though it's not the actual base version of AMS or Death's Advance is kind of bad because the amount of fights you're not going to play Death's Advance on in reality is pretty low.
Funny part about this is you have two options, which situationally, utility-wise, would be something you would never give up in a million years in Wraithwalk and the reduced AMS cooldown if they're required for a fight, let's say. And the only other trade-off you have in the tree is to lose 30% effectiveness on your Runeforge, which is just like, it's like a laughable like DPS but trade-off that you have to make to like even get those two things just to improve your quality of life on a fight. So it's like either lose a shit ton of damage or just waddle around the entire fight and not hit targets because you can't keep up with them. So
yeah, honestly, like I do want to bring something up as well that I've noticed when we're looking at the druid and the priest trees. It's the baseline of each of these classes. If you look at like druids, they get a CC, they get a defensive, they get a heal, they get all the basic stuff for their spec. Priests, same thing, they get 2 defensives, heal, powered shield, they get a raid buff, all of that. And if you look at Death Knight's baseline, it's kind of barren in that aspect. I can totally get it if they're doing it for like thematic reasons, like maybe an Unholy DK doesn't want Icebound Fortitude for whatever reason, or Lichborn for a Frost DK. Like I get that, but I don't know, stuff like Anti-Magic Shell, Death's Advance, I don't see why that's not part of the baseline when other classes are getting stuff that is always useful to have. Well, Death Knight is kind of stuck with stuff that's like, I don't know, On a Pale Horse, Path of Frost. Not really useful buttons to always have. I don't know, just my take on that.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, if you just take a blanket look at this real quick, like just a snapshot of this in your head, you will see that these points are not necessarily laid out for you to make interesting decisions based on how it affects your class. They're clearly laid out by theme, right? Like the entire right side of the tree is extremely unholy based. The left side is extremely frost based. Even things like, Chains of Ice, which have about the same usefulness, if not potentially more for other specs than Frost. It is a technical Frost thing, so it is down the Frost tree. So maybe an argument to be made would be, thinking about the layout of the trees much less in the terms of like lore or theme and much more about, realistically how you would ever choose these things.
Well, it's like not only split up on theme as well, but the left side of the tree is like resource based and the right side of the tree is like throughput based. So you're also making a decision not only between whether or not you want the spec to play like shit or also between whether or not the spec actually does damage. And then the middle is like the things that you would all want in different scenarios, but then since you're forced into going to the right side of the tree for throughput, and then you're forced somewhat to get the resource generating part of the left tree, then you just don't even have enough points to get like the interesting decisions out of the middle where you'd situationally change them.
Yeah, like down the middle, for example, right? Like if you have a bunch of optional situational things, the trees should not be laid out, hopefully, in a position where you have to pick a bunch of other optional things to get to another optional thing, because then, that's almost very rare that you would actually need all of those. Whereas a position like where Unholy Ground is on the tree, or Blinding Sleet, or things like that are just 1 point send-offs you can just do on the side of the tree for a specific thing, that feels way better when you're passing something that you really, really want all the time to pick something that's optional and never having to pick, something entirely optional to get to something else that happens to be very good for specifically that. Dorki...
I'd make the argument...
Go ahead.
One more thing. I'd make the argument, if you had 3 more points available to you on this tree, it would be almost perfect in terms of like flexibility between builds and what you can pick between and make interesting decisions. But because you don't have those 3 points, you're like kind of hedge locked into like picking dog shit choices or skipping out entirely on the interesting ones.
Before going into, I want to ask Dorki specifically about some, and Muffin, what do you go by? Muffin
Muffin, that's
specifically?
fine.
Muffin, cool. About like some M plus stuff for sure. How do you guys feel about the potential of like what they're gonna add in patches in this next upcoming expansion? I feel like something that is possible, and I think kind of goes against their whole idea of like an evergreen system, is like you get to max level, but then in 10.1 it's like, oh well, we gave you guys like 5 more points to play around with on your class tree, and that could like massively change how like the meta is in the game and what those 5 points would mean for everyone. But maybe that's something that they have in mind to see what DK could evolve into over the course of the expansion as opposed to the first patch. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Dorky and Muffin, what kind of stuff do you guys think you'd be looking at specifically in the spec tree for like Mythic Plus? Like what Mythic Plus kind of stuff do you think you maybe wouldn't see in Raid as much that you think might just basically be required, or is it pretty similar?
So generally, when it comes to all the grip talents, those are more of raid utility. I was thinking, would there ever be a case in raid where you would maybe sacrifice some DPS just to become like a grip bot, for example, so that you don't have to bring an extra DK or you don't have to have your tank play as a blood DK if for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think there's a chance they do that, right? Like, I mean, if there's anyone that's ever been brought into a raid as a grip bot, it's never a DPS DK, almost ever. It's usually just like, you know, you'd bring your blood DK in to play the grip legendary currently to like solve a problem, and this like gives you the option to do a talent point to actually do that. And it's also super easy because you're probably going to take Unholy Bond like every single time, right? So it's not like a long way to get out of the way to be able to do that. Like even as a tank in Mythic Plus, right? Like 2 charges of Death Grip all the time in Mythic Plus would be insane for stops and for Sanguine and for plenty of other things like that. Muffin, do you have anything about the spec tree before we move on to Unholy?
I'm just like curious, like you take the Death's Echo, like the double grip and stuff, but I'm also curious if it tells you have an extra charge of like Death's Advance and stuff, could you potentially take that and then skip out and take a Death's Advance in the middle?
That's a great question. I don't know if we'd ever be able to know that. I would assume not, which kind of implies that they want you to get it.
There's another talent, we'll get to it in Frost, where if you didn't talent in Power Rune Weapon, it gives you a charge of it, and it's specifically worded to do that, but this one isn't worded to do.
So I wonder also, just a quick note, we're not going to go full on into the blood tree until later. We'll kind of look at what a blood spec tree looks like later. Is it just as bad for blood to get Abomination Limb as well?
I wouldn't say so at all. Like, blood has a lot of utility versatility in this tree. They can basically take all of the utility and become just a utility bot in the best way possible, which is kind of why it so feels bad for DPS DKs, because blood can do it all, and DPS DK can do like one thing maybe if you're lucky and you're able to, you know, spend that point on, say, Blinding Sleet instead of taking Death's Advance if you don't need it for a fight. And that's just like a solid maybe.
See, that's the thing. After looking at it a bit on my own, I don't know exactly how true that would be, because like I feel like something you don't have access to now in Power and Rune Weapon is blood could be very powerful. And also Soul Reaper, depending on its tuning, sometimes like single one-off abilities for tanks can like just hit like extremely hard. Like that's something that tanks don't really have right now, is like insane execute niche, where like in an execute thing you actually have a tank pumping a lot of damage for you, both on like Mythic Plus bosses and raid bosses, and like that's something that could also be really interesting that isn't really a thing right now outside of like Prot Warrior kind of.
Yeah, I was about to say actually, because like Power Warrior has pretty insane execute right now.
Mm-hmm. But they're losing a little bit of that with their Covenant, right? Wasn't like Condemn like a like pretty fat part of that? Like I know they can do it without Condemn. I think it was like Necro was doing like really insane execute before this last patch. We were thinking about playing it, but it just got crammed way too hard.
The blood talents in the general tree are like really good for raid in terms of like throughput.
You're using a noise gate, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a little.
Here?
Yeah, get closer to your mic when you talk.
Does that sound good now?
Oh,
does that
wow.
sound nice and
That's
sensual? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Well, I'm just gonna keep it like this. The blood tree is real nice for raid in terms of like throughput options, but in Mythic Plus, if you like take a look at that tree, like I don't know about you, if I'm playing Blood and Keys, I'm never taking Soul Reaper. I don't think it's worth like the point. I'd rather take other things for like utility, slows. That's one thing about the tree that got linked here too, is in terms of like slows, snares, things that you can use to kite, it's like non-existent currently with the way the points are like spread out. So you could go down the Soul Reaper path, but like why would you when you can take like the D&D 90% slow, or like Wraith Walk, or Asphyxiate, or double chains, or kick gives you runic power, or like there's so many options, and then you just don't have enough points to like grab all that stuff that you would want as blood, and then you'd rely on like the blood specific things that come from the blood specific tree. The rest of it's like all quality of life stuff. But for raid, it's great.
Okay, I'm going to throw one curveball at you guys before we move on to the Unholy Tree. What things in the DK class tree are in spots where realistically in an entire expansion, no spec will ever choose them? I think it's important to kind of single out things like this so Blizzard knows that it needs to have a reduction in cost, an easier application, or it needs to be buffed to be considered. Where would you guys see that as a spot on the tree?
The little triangle around Death Pact, I don't see myself ever picking those unless I have so many points I can fill out the entire tree.
I was thinking the same thing. Like, you're never taking permafrost.
Yeah, same idea. Like that little triangle, the one next to it with Wraithwalk and Sacrificial Pact. Like, there's just no reason to go down there, especially when the nodes above them are so. I don't want to say useless, but like.
Yeah, these are very strange. They're very strange because the other I don't even remember nodes like this in the priest tree that we were just looking at. I guess they just have more abilities or something, but yeah, there just wasn't anything.
I would actually argue I could see that being used in like really high M plus keys or in PvP. Like I feel like especially PvP, right? Like I can see
the avoidance,
either permafrost or we were talking about the Death Pact tree, right? Death Pact, Leech, and permafrost because those are pretty good in PvP, and I can definitely see them being like somewhat of a niche just so that you can survive in really, really high keys.
Yeah, I could see that with maybe the 1 point into the avoidance node too. Like I know there's definitely raid fights before where I think the most extreme example of this was when we killed Il'gynoth, we all put on avoidance corruption. And that was like basically the only realistic way we were gonna kill it as fast as we did. And like sometimes avoidance is just like the best stat in the game, but it's pretty rare. It's only when like everything on the fight happens to be avoidance based.
Yeah,
okay.
To me, it's like, do you want to sacrifice damage so that you can pick up V stuff for, whatever hell you might be doing?
And I think Blizzard needs to really think about that too, because like outside of like high level play where people really appreciate and think about utility a lot and defensive stuff, I think Covenants, if they proved anything else, proved that the gamer in 2022 is going to pick the thing that makes them do more damage than the thing that is potentially even of higher value, but it just doesn't show up on the damage meter. So one thing Blizzard can do to alleviate that is not have people decide to or have to make those decisions. If the last point on your tree that is not obvious is picking between an extremely strong defensive or an extremely strong offensive, you're going to see almost everyone pick the offensive version of that. So that's something that they can alleviate kind of by just setting the trees up the right way.
The bottom middle section of the tree also feels really shit if you actually want A-Bomb's Limb as a DPS DK. Because the way they have it set up right now is like the bottom middle section of each like theme, let's say like Frost, Blood, Unholy, is tailored to the, like, let's say that specs like thing. Like the left side is like clearly heavily favoring Frost, the middle is very heavily favoring Blood, and then the right side is just so good it's good for everybody. But if you want Limb and you need Limb on a fight, or let's say Limb's good for like Cleave or something like that, it feels so bad throwing 3 points into improved Death Strike, and all that does is like make you heal more with Death Strike when it's already a broken ability for healing, and wasting 3 points on that as a DPS DK feels like shit. But like the Blood people probably love it, but like you know what I mean? Like it shouldn't be a thing that punishes one spec and then benefits the other spec if it's not the choice that you're making at that specific spot to begin with. Like you just want the Limb, you don't care about the Death Strike points.
Yeah, the Shadow Priest actually has a very similar issue to this, where to get an extremely good point at the bottom of their tree, there is a 3-point talent that is your dots do extra damage when you are shielded. Right, so like they definitely need to be very careful with what they select to be the 3-point talents, because it's just such a heavy investment that if it's ever not very valuable, the thing under it is probably just going to get hard ignored. Oh, or if it's not hard ignored, the people who are forced to run it, again, PI kind of showed you, like forcing people to give away their cooldowns, forcing people to do anything that feels bad, it doesn't feel good, right? So you don't want to do that. All right, Unholy. You linked me. I have both that you linked me, and you said one was more single target, more AoE. Let's focus on the single target right now.
Before we go too deep into that, though, there's one more thing on the general tree I do want to point out. If you scroll back up, the section just before Lichborn, that's supposed to be like a utility section on the Unholy side of the tree, just before Unholy Bond. But all of those abilities are just so... they're really not good to have there, because you're going through and you really want to get to Unholy Bond, but you're forced to take all this stuff that just doesn't do anything for you majority of the time. Like Lichborn no longer has its defensive nature because of the conduit, so it's just a Charm, Fear, Sleep, Dispel. Before that, you have Control Undead, Death Grip extension, and recharge if you kill it. Grip of the Dead, which is a slow in D&D, and then Enfeeble, which is just a DR on ghoul hits, which, I don't know, that entire section is just, it feels really bad to see because of what comes directly after it. You're forced through all that kind of trash just to get to Unholy Bond.
Anyone else have any thoughts specifically about the class tree before we move on? Now, keep in mind, when we talk about Unholy, and we're going to talk about this with Frost almost certainly, is like the empowered rune weapon point is going to come up as a point of contention in Frost because you have that option to get that a second charge or another thing of it on the tree. So you can refer back to this at any point, but now we're probably going to focus more on the decision making in the spec trees. So moving on to Unholy, and anyone has the floor for where this is going. This is actually interesting. I like YOLO made one of these when I was at an event, and it would look nothing like this, so that's pretty interesting. I'm interested to see where you went.
Okay, so since I've made this tree, I'll kind of walk you through the decisions because looking at this, a lot of Unholy players are going to be very confused. It like doesn't take Apocalypse, it doesn't take Frenzied Monstrosity. It just seems so weird.
Oh, thank God. Wait, hold on. Which one is that? Is that an AoE or a single target?
Single target.
First one he linked.
Okay.
So there's a lot of really weird stuff going on in the Unholy general tree. The first point of contention comes in an Infectious Wound, which comes just below Outbreak. If you look at that talent and you read through it, it's just really weird. It seems like they were trying to kind of port over Cankerous Wounds from BFA.
Yeah, the bracers.
Which gave you, not the bracers. That gave
that was popping the wounds. Sorry.
Yeah. This is kind of Cankerous Wounds, but it seems like somebody misread the tooltip because it increased your chance to generate 3 wounds with Festering Strike by 20%. This gives you a 20% chance to generate up to 3 extra wounds, which basically turns Festering Strike into a lottery. Are you going to get 2 wounds? Are you going to get 6 wounds? You really don't know. It's really weird because it's going to be really good because what competes with it on the other side is improved Festering Strike, which just doesn't do anything for the spec. So you're forced into taking this basically, and it makes the spec very RNG, especially when you consider Apocalypse. If you're playing a fight and you have any wounds on your target at all, this talent makes it to where if you press Festering Strike, you could just waste wounds, and it's kind of counterintuitive. And that's kind of why later down you see that Apocalypse isn't even taken, because with this talent and Death Rot, which is just above Festermite on the bottom left, it becomes so RNG on if you're ever able to press Apocalypse in time that basically going with this talent tree setup is the only setup you can do in single target that's pet focused that actually operates in an intuitive way. It's really bad that you can't take Apocalypse because it makes the spec just unintuitive or not play right.
So I think so kind of what you're getting at is with the increased ways to burst wounds with Death Coil is that by the time APOC is coming off cooldown, you could be in a position very likely that you do not have wounds and it's just sitting off cooldown and something you have to generate for and then not Death Coil, correct?
So there's
you want to
two
pop
different...
the wounds too, right?
So there's 2 situations here where this becomes an issue. Infectious Wound, generating up to 6 wounds, meaning you're going to want to play down to 0 wounds every time before you press Festering Strike, so you're not wasting any, which makes it very hard to set up Apocalypse. And then there's Death Rot, which gives you Sudden Doom. That's what it is. Gives you a chance to pop 2 Festering Wounds with Sudden Doom proc, and also increases your shadow damage. So with Death Rot being there, if you get a Sudden Doom proc just before Apocalypse, you're going to want to use it because you want that shadow damage increase. But then you're also spending the wounds that you just generated to use for Apocalypse.
Okay.
On that. It's just super counterintuitive in the way it works.
So it sounds like maybe one of the biggest problems would be exactly Infectious Wound. Also, I feel like they could actually keep Infectious Wound, but just make it way different than it is right now. Like the thing that's upgraded with ranks is adding the amount of wounds that can be there instead of adding the chance, which I think might even make it a lot more easy to play. Because like you're looking like because a 20% chance to get 3 additional is like that's just there's way too much RNG in that. Like WoW has actually done a pretty good job across most specs. There's a few outliers where they've like kind of removed that level of RNG. I don't know why they would choose to increase it, especially on an already very dull mechanic, in my opinion, in the game being the generating and bursting of wounds, right? So unless they like tuned that to be a much higher source of your damage.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. So with those 2 talents being as strong as they are, you just really can't take Apocalypse and use it effectively which also bars out Army of the Damned, which basically forces you into Gargoyle. So this is kind of the only unholy single target tree for a pet focused build that makes sense playstyle wise, and it doesn't turn into lottery DK. It's really weird how it ended up, honestly.
I went a different order in my talent tree because I was thinking of unique damage profiles that classes bring to raid fights, and not taking Army of the Damned is like a massive mistake if you have any sort of priority target or burn phase where you need damage. But in order to take that, you got to give up a lot, which feels like shit. And maybe that's something they like. It's like a unique decision-making process, I guess. But the majority of my problems with the Unholy Tree is how bloated the bottom section of it is and how strong it is towards the bottom, especially like around the middle. They slapped like two legendaries, one covenant ability, an artifact ability, two of your core class mechanics, and then like your best three conduits all in that section. And it's just like, okay, well, I kind of want all of this, but you can't take all of it, which I guess is good for design intention. I'll link mine, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And also just to kind of point out what he said, I actually think that's something that is extremely unique about Unholy, is that I think if you were to look at just a bar of how a class does damage on any amount of targets, let's just say single, over the course of like 10 minutes, Unholy is going to look much different than the cookie cutter massive 2 or 3 minute cooldown class. Like they have obviously the strong army burst, but they actually are one of the few classes that has decent cleave and decent single target cooldowns every minute, usually right now. And that is something where he's talking about raid niches where Unholy is sometimes brought because they are that. I mean, actually, Sylvanas P2 is an excellent example. I think they're the only class in the game that had something reasonably good or great every single platform. And so that's something where if they're running a different tree, that could be more damaging than it appears just simply on a 5-minute sim to lose that kind of flexibility. Let me look at Atlas's here. So you went like a totally different route. Let's see. Or not totally different.
Not totally different.
Yeah.
I just gave up all the good shit. So
you gave up Festermite and Death.
Like,
yeah, giving up Festermite and Death
Yeah.
Rot feels real bad.
it feels like
Reaping
ass,
too.
and also you lose on reaping, which is fucking huge. But then you can be like, hey man, every 4 minutes I can pop off on like one target, and that's like the raid niche kind of thing. But like that's the problem with this tree is you're giving up so much like throughput that makes your class work just to say like, hey, at this exact time on a fight, I'm gonna pop off, and maybe that's worth bringing me for. If we're gonna be real here, the talent tree doesn't matter at all. You can scrap the entire Unholy Tree. That's not the problem with like the spec. The tree has a lot of problems itself. The fact that Wounds isn't still in the game is like criminal in its current iteration, because it's extremely restrictive to how the spec plays, function, is useful in raid fights. And it's also nonsensical to think that rogues had like combo points on specific targets back in the day, and they would build combo points on targets, and then Blizzard was like, you know, that's probably not great, because anytime you have to swap targets, you lose all your combo points that you just invested. And then Unholy literally has that with Wounds. Like, you're investing 66% of your resource bar into like building up enough wounds to like do something to a target, and then that target dies early or what have you. You have to swap targets, and then you just wasted all of those wounds and all of those resources doing that. It's basically budget combo points is what Wounds is. And the really shitty part about it is, for like the past couple of years now, there's been no depth to Wounds at all. Festermite was like the only kind of thing that made you think about your wounds, like outside of Apocalypse, like build to 4, hit Apocalypse. That's it. Outside of that, like pop them, build them, pop them, build them. And then now they're bringing it back, but now you're being like forced into taking Festermite on the far left of the tree and giving up like things that are core to like the spec itself, like Apocalypse, Army of the Damned, and stuff like that to do that. So in my opinion, I think they should just scrap wounds entirely. It's been kind of like played out now for like a few years where Unholy hasn't really had any sort of feel good moment in a raid outside of like 30 targets stacked up for Epidemic, because like the core function of the spec building and popping wounds has been really stale. And everything they've kind of like built around that with borrowed power and all that has been also pretty boring as well.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dorky.
Personally, I have the opposite opinion because, you know, coming from an M+ perspective, wounds were like by far the most fun part about Unholy Tree, where I would have liked to see, you know, maybe a more wound focused build, and then maybe for raid it'd be more of a less wound focused build, because I completely agree. In raid, wounds are so boring. Like, I actually get so bored playing Unholy DK because you literally just put your wound, pop it, put your cooldowns on cooldown, and that's about it, right? Like, you know, you def cool here and like, because like in M+, especially during BFA when I played it for like most of the expansion, when you had bursting sores combined with fester might, combined with like all these other little interactions like infected wounds or infected claws, it was just so much fun. It felt like you were a sort of a fire mage. You had and like the whole issue, Alice, where you're talking about where you like waste a lot of the wounds, that doesn't necessarily happen as much in M plus, specifically because of bursting swords and fester might. Like
Yeah.
if anything, you would actually intentionally try to snipe low HP targets so that you would instantly pop them or instantly get the strength buff. Like on Reaping, for example, in season 2 of BFA, there were situations in MDI or even in like really high keys where you would spawn Reaping, you would have a crap ton of Reaping mobs on top of the boss, and then you would generate like an infinite amounts of wounds with your infected claws. Like you transform your pet and they start cleaving everything. And in that situation, when all the Reaping mobs die, whether it's from you cleaving them down or they just like naturally die to everyone's cleave, it would just all blow up at the same time, do insane amount of priority damage, and give you 30 stacks of Fester Might right away. And I felt like that was exciting as hell. Like there was no DPS that felt more fun to me at the time.
Yeah, I also
And
played
it
Mythic
remained
Plus
true.
that whole season, and that. So yeah, your take is that the situation with AoEing and Mythic Plus, the gameplay and playstyle of it is so good that the outright removal of wounds maybe isn't the play, but removing it from its single target toolkit and making it a very AoE focused thing. I mean, that works. I just think that most classes in this game are their AoE selves are just a like extension of their single target selves in a way. A lot of the best classes that do that, and it would feel very weird to have like a entire, let's just say like a redesign of what the core functional like single target rotation is for Unholy Death Knight, and then like in dungeons it's just all about popping wounds again. I do agree with you though, but I just think the single target version of that spec has been so dull, and then as opposed to other specs in this game that have been completely ruined by Blizzard's design, Feral Druid being the one that kind of pops out to me the most. There's only like one version of that class in the past that I feel like was much, much, much better than the current version. Where in Death Knight, I think you could point to a lot of points in Warlords of Draenor, actually 2 different builds, and in BFA even, that were more fun than the entirety of Shadowlands Unholy Decay. So when you have old versions of the class that are just significantly better designed than current, even moving back to those as an option, or obviously a complete redesign would of the single target stuff feels good. Because like you said, wounds are unbelievably dull. There's 0 dopamine hit of popping those in like succession. You're not doing any damage. Like it just feels really bad.
There's an important distinction though. I also agree. Like the AoE section of wounds does feel engaging and fun, but that is entirely separate from Festering Strike. Like the dopamine hit you get from mass AoEing on that comes from like your pet generating wounds through infected claws and like D&D drops having a chance to like generate wounds. And you can still have that fun AoE section of the thing without having the single target focus of it also be generating wounds on one target at a time and popping them one target at a time. They could very easily design the spec still to have D&D generate something that you pop that does AoE, something in that regard, but then like the core function of the spec shouldn't be based around generating and popping wounds. It should be something else. It should be disease based, pet based, cooldown based. I don't know. Like they don't like the old rune system because it confused people. They want to streamline stuff like that, so you can't do that. But like literally anything else would be better than what they have now. And you can still make it work on AoE. I don't think the spec fundamentally should feel good to play on 20 plus targets and feel like dog shit to play below that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Definitely.
ultimately.
100%.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
Oh.
it's just like, you go ahead.
Go ahead, guys. I've talked
No,
so
no,
much.
you go
Go.
ahead, Tess. No, you go ahead.
Yeah,
Tess.
Muffin, you are going.
Muffin,
going.
yeah.
So I was just like, I mean, Unholy is really dull now, right? But I think when you're talking about BFA, a lot of BFA just comes down to it was more fun for a lot of people because it was just uncapped mass AoE where you didn't really have to do a lot. Like that is why if Plus was fun in BFA.
I actually don't know if that's true. Like obviously yes, doing huge damage is always fun, but the way that I think certain classes do AoE, like if every class is homogenized to where you're just a DPS and then you just press a button to AoE, like let's use swipe for example. Like if every melee DPS just has a version of swipe or spinning crane kick, and then that's just the button they press to AoE and it's that simple, then you go back to single targeting. That's what it would be. I think on the way Unholy built up and then spent AoE was so unique and different from any other class in the game. It was obviously insane, but it was actually just a different playstyle, and that was what made it really fun, I think.
To me, it was mostly the Fester Might, like having that window of burst and not having that window like, nowadays is because like right now when I play Unholy and M plus, it's so bold, it's so dull because like you're all you're doing is really just worrying about your pet damage and epidemic as your main spender. And
Yeah.
I do feel like I mean not Festermite, Festering Strike is definitely the biggest issue where it doesn't really provide a whole lot in M plus, but at the same time it's like the core reason why wounds really suck in raid or single target.
I want to direct this at Muffin specifically about Festermite, since they are bringing it back, and it's kind of the core of what we were talking about with old AoE. If they're bringing it back, I assume they're going to bring it back in the previous form, which was actually much different than a lot of cooldowns they have in the game that they've made much more intuitive to newer players. So, like for example, if you look at Iron Fur in the same way you look at the way Iron Fur is applied and stacked, it's completely retroactive. It's like all the time it's changing. If you put one up 5 seconds ago, that one will go away in 2 seconds. Then you'll have 2 stacks for 2 seconds as soon as you press it, and then it'll go away. And it's constantly churning over and over again based on what you've done in the last few seconds. So like Festermite is the opposite of that, right? It's something that once you start it. So it creates some weird gameplay elements where you like want to wait so that burst window is at the right time, kind of, and you don't want to start it too early. Like for example, if you popped a wound 10 seconds before you did your AoE in Festermite, that's going to feel like shit, right? Because you're going to get all those stacks for half the time that you would have gotten it normally. But that being said, I think a lot of really good players actually found that to be really interesting and something you actually had to play around and had to think about. And it's not just something where it's just always ever changing. How do you guys feel about the design of that ability and how they're going to bring it back? Muffin, maybe specifically.
I feel like I think it's a good thing because like it's just it's just not mindless AoEing. Like it takes some profound. Like you have to think for a bit. And if you actually do fuck up just a tiny bit, it can hurt you a lot, right? So I think it's something where I think it's good that you need to think sometimes and not just smash your buttons.
Yeah, it's like I was saying too. It's about the window of damage when you're doing Festermite, right? Like that's what made it fun. You would have these windows of burst, and then outside of that, you just sort of play however you would normally play.
Yeah, I just think it's like a design philosophy that they have done for different classes with conflicting results. Because like there are definitely classes that, I mean, even like the concept of pandemic is like this, right? Like if pandemic doesn't exist, you have to, clip your dots perfectly, and that's something you have to think about. But I think in general, things pandemicing in WoW is a thing widely appreciated by most players, but that is literally dumbing down that mechanic into this. It's just kind of quality of life player improvement. So I was just kind of tossing out the idea of what Festermite is and like how that's a little bit different from before. But I agree with you. Like if you are someone trying to like optimize, like it is fascinating to play around.
Unless it's single target. Because when you're in a single target scenario, you're just sitting there putting yourself through forced AFK scenarios where you're just staring at the timer for it to expire, and then you're building wounds, but you have nothing to do in between those 2 points. Like you don't want to keep popping because it's going to expire anyways, and then you're staring at it for like 4 seconds. You're like, I can't wait for this to end so I can play the game again. And then you actually start playing the game again. It's I don't know. Unholy is just like one of those specs that like on single target it feels so bad, and on AoE it feels so good. And it's weird because it's also the single target spec. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that is it seems like it's a spec trying to do a few things but it's not really finding a role within one of them. Is there any abilities in this spec tree you guys think need to be looked at in general as well before we kind of sign off on Unholy? Is it like you guys still happy with Epidemic? Do you guys like the idea of Death Coil procs consuming wounds? Do you like how there's so many like 2-target Death Coil? Obviously they've put a huge emphasis into Death Coil in this tree, which may be kind of their idea of a redesign. If you're going to see Blizzard redesigning classes, a big way they might do that is through the talent tree. So like, what do you guys think about that specifically?
Personally, I feel like Unholy Assault should be a little bit higher up because I would like to have that ability back as somewhat of a more, quote unquote baseline ability. Because it feels really bad, especially from last expansion where you just never play Unholy Assault anymore. And
here
losing abilities definitely feels bad, especially when we're trying to play different from, because like I feel like we might not even play that different compared to the last expansion and even like the one before that, whereas like other specs they might feel a lot more fresh. But that's how I see it.
I think in general this is like an overarching statement about both of the DPS specs. It feels stale going into this new expansion. We don't have like many new active things that we're getting, and when we're looking at like the options between the talent trees, we're picking between old things that we used to have and used to play with all the time, and then you're choosing between those. So like it feels kind of shitty that you're losing out on something that you used to have, and then the things that you're getting in return are just things that you already did have. I wanted like new abilities, honestly, somewhere in this tree, like something that just did anything new that we haven't seen before, and we don't really have any of that. We just have new passives, which are cool, I guess, and they change the way you play, which is also good. But not having new abilities feels really shit.
Yeah, I mean, all I really have to say is like tuning wise, there's a couple talents in the Unholy Tree specifically that have been just dead forever. Look at Harbinger of Doom. Look at Pestilence. Look at Pestilent Pustules. They've been so undertuned for so long. Seeing them in the tree, especially where they are, I feel like they should be looked at least like tuning wise, be buffed up, if not replaced with something new, like Atlas said, just to add some freshness to the spec.
Yeah, definitely.
Harbinger of Doom being still in the game is like hilarious to me. It's been like the worst talent that's been in the Unholy Tree. Like it's borderline useless. And it's just been there for years and years and years, and it keeps being put as like an option that you have to sacrifice something to get, and it's like laughably bad at how useless it is.
Yeah, regardless
Yeah.
of like its usefulness too, it also is something that feels really bad. Like imagine you're in like a lust opener and you're like accumulating charges. You're like, man, I really need to get rid of this runic power, and it's just like it won't go away.
The way that it used to work, I'm not sure if they plan on changing this at all, but it's not like a 15% flat, it's 15% additional to what it already has to proc. So you'll get like maybe a couple procs here and there, but like over time it averages out to be like absolutely nothing. You get like one, like maybe like 5, 6 extra Death Coil casts from that proc, and Death Coil's not doing that much before. It's gonna do more now, but like still, it's like laughably bad in terms of like what you would take otherwise for it.
Yeah, it's like a 0.2% DPS increase. Like it's got to be looked at again. Come on, just like tune it up just a little bit, make it fun, please.
It's also a little sad to see that Clawing Shadows is a little bit out of the way to get. I think that's something that was multiple fights in this expansion, that having a melee, having the option to have that was really good. That's just gonna, like the spec's gonna lose a little something from that. Can you show me, did you link an AoE build, by the way, before we leave Unholy? Like I want to see what, is it the second one you linked?
Yeah, second one I linked.
Okay, cool. What does Unholy AoE look like next expansion?
Infected Claws, Bursting Swords, just like you know and love, except sadly we're not able to go down the left side to take like Pestilence or Pestilent Pustules, just because so much stuff in the right half of the tree is so good. Infected Claws, Reaping, you're looking at stuff like Unholy Blight to boost it further with morbidity. I can't talk.
Morbidity, yeah.
Yes. And then you can take like Defile to reduce the cooldown down to 20 seconds, so it actually syncs up better with your Dark Transformation too. It's a lot of really cool stuff you can do, but it's basically BFA Unholy AoE on steroids.
That is, I mean, that sounds great. See, that's like
Yeah.
the other part about the single target, like we said, is that the AoE sounds great. It's also hilarious to see Army of the Damned being taken without Apocalypse. That is just something. But yeah, that's
Hey,
such is life.
If you're going into Mythic Plus, you're going to want an army on every boss, and that's how you do it.
Yep.
I'm just glad we don't have Apocalypse. I hate Apocalypse. It's like I feel like Apocalypse is one of those abilities where it just feels very bland. All you're doing is just summoning a couple of ghouls that only melee attack. If they made them somehow do anything more interesting than just some like
The
dumb
funniest
guardians
thing about
that
Apocalypse is that you pop it and you're like, oh, I just pressed my DPS cooldown, I'm about to pop off, and then the guys take 5 seconds to climb out of the ground.
Yeah, that's
They're not
yeah.
actually doing anything.
That being said,
also
though,
an M plus is kind of stupid. It randomly pulls sometimes the maggot.
I wish it was at a point though where it was like an option to take it, right? Because like my idea of these is, you know, if in reality, it's like the same reason why there was so much nostalgia for like the classic and Wrath talent trees. It's like, you know, oh, they're different than they are now, but like in reality, you were making a lot of the same decisions. It wasn't like you were completely rebuilding your tree. You were really selecting like one thing instead of another. It's like very little actual choice. That's the thing I'm worrying about with these. I would love to see APOC, maybe not something you take all the time, but like in a specific key or on a specific boss. It's like, oh, well, this is a boss where really having something up every 1 minute is so important that that actually does make this better than what the current build you're doing all the time is. I think that's what they're striving for with this, and I really hope that they, with the balance and tuning of these, they actually make that a thing where you're making much more decisions than you normally are. This would be a complete failure if by the point at the end of this expansion, people have like and like basically they're like saved trees. It's like AoE build, a single target build, and it's not more complicated than that. That would be terrible. So hopefully there's a, you know, at least something where it's like, okay, single target build, but I take Will the Necropolis because without that I get one shot by this mechanic, or, you know, things like that. And you can actually do that without feeling like shit. Like there has to be balance in those things that you're picking between, which means Blizzard actually has to understand what the baseline build is, how many points you have to work with, and then what you're actually choosing between. So that's going to be, I think, does anyone have any final points on Unholy? I think we kind of went pretty deep on it, but any final words?
I have one.
Not necessarily Unholy, but I wanted to ask Atlas. You said you wanted something new, like it's gone dull, right? But don't you think that tier sets, like the way they can interact with the spec, is something that can usually replace like a new ability or something, but it makes you like play another style of the spec?
I would say yes, but Unholy has to put up a wound and it has to pop a wound, and the only thing you can do with that is how you change how you pop the wounds, which is fine, I guess, if they can make it work. I haven't found it fulfilling in years.
We also haven't had tier sets in years, right?
Yeah, that's also true. I think the tier set that they made now, that we currently have on live, is kind of exciting, I guess. It feels good when you proc it at like good moments and you know you're going to do a lot of damage, but I don't think it makes gameplay fun in any way at all. I hope tier sets in Dragonflight kind of do that.
It's a mixed bag, because like there are definitely tier sets in the current tier that are even powerful potentially, and they have changed the way you've played. But I think a lot of people are just like, man, I just want something different. I want tier sets to be like a catalyst to make us play differently, so it's not the same every patch. That's true, but also sometimes that can be bad. sometimes it can make your playstyle worse than it is normally, right? Like I think something that sticks out to me like that is actually Assassination Rogue's really powerful right now, but I personally just hate that like dot playstyle of like how, like snapshotting the dot at your end of your thing. Even though it's something I've generally loved in the game, I just hate what it turned that spec into. It's just so much. Like, even though it's different, I just don't like it as much. Obviously, that's my opinion. But and I don't really, the thing is with Unholy is I don't know what kind of a tier set is really ever going to change how Unholy plays. Really, like think about it. Like what is a tier set going to do to Unholy where it's like a totally different thing? Like it's always going to be wounds. Like they're not going to take that out. I just don't really know what they can do with it.
I just wish Unholy would like return to a dot spec, because I found Necrotic Plague to be very rewarding gameplay, and it was cyclical. You would go into the same kind of loops, so there was not too much you were doing there, right? It was like intuitive, like you extend, you build, you extend, you build. But it was more fun than what I have now. I would think more about things with that than what I had now. And obviously you had like the other option of going into breath, and you had a separate single target build, but just something more with diseases. Like Unholy Blight operates as a second disease. I would love if Unholy baseline had multiple diseases that you would put up, and then some of them you could like snap off instantly, some of them you could increase the rate of ticking, some of them you would make them auto spread, just something along those lines instead of wounds. But also I have a big gripe with the fact that Unholy still has every single button on the GCD. It's really funny to me that like they had this thing recently where they were like, okay, you know what, you guys were right. The GCD thing, probably not great. We'll take a few things off. And then Unholy has been the spec in the game that has had the most things on GCD in terms of cooldowns, or things that generate resources for your cooldowns. And when they took away everything off GCD, like Frost is running around rampant with every single button off GCD except for like Frostworms. And then Unholy still has literally every button still on GCD. It's so weird.
It's very weird, but I thought about that as well. I thought about like putting a lot of things off the GCD, like APOC, you know, empowering your pet, stuff like that. Then it just turns into a situation where you're popping all your cooldowns, pressing a macro, and then you're just getting into like, you know, like the middle part of the Unholy rotation, like not when you have APOC up or it's about to come up, like in the middle, like 30 seconds or 40 into a pull without lust. Then you just get to that earlier, and that's really the part of the spec that feels like shit. I feel like they probably tested Unholy without the GCDs, and they were like, man, there's really not a lot here, is there? And then like that's kind of where they're at. But that like kind of just shows the underlying problem, is that the spec is just generally not that interesting.
That's exactly my point. I think it has way too many cooldowns that are low impact, or things that you don't get excited for without many decision making that goes behind it. And then if you take those off GCD, you're like, oh, wow, well, you're just spamming all the buttons at the same time. It's like, exactly, yeah, the spec doesn't play well. You should probably look at that, maybe change that. Even take some of these cooldowns away. Honestly, I'm totally fine for them to get rid of like 6 cooldowns that Unholy has, as long as it adds depth to the normal rotation that you find yourself looping through.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And to add on to like your disease point earlier too, like every single last boss this entire expansion has had huge issues with Unholy Pet AI. If they gave Unholy an option to go petless, if it was just diseases, even if it was suboptimal, please give Unholy an answer to situations like that. I don't want to deal with Timmy being dumb all the time.
It actually has been like every end boss.
Literally
This
everyone.
expansion. Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe Sepulcher being the funniest when they would actually just do like the full loop around the rim. Okay, that is all for Unholy. Let's move on to Frost. Do you guys have a single target and Unholy Frost build that you want to link that we can kind of just go through? I'm actually interested to see if you guys considered or did take the second charge of Empowered Moon Weapon.
I will get you one in just a second. I don't know if you already have one prepared, Atlas. If you do, you can link it.
I have
Probably
an
really
AoE one and it's fun.
All right, yo, link
Okay.
that
It's
then.
super fun.
Yeah, link it.
Okay, I'm really scared for Frost going into the next expansion. I'll preface this. They gave you literally everything you would ever want in an AoE scenario, and you could grab all of it. So it's gonna be a fucking demon on cleave. It's actually gross.
I noticed that
Now,
when
is
I
this
go ahead, Muffin.
I was just asking, is this like a cleave build, or do you want this to be like a full-on AoE build?
Okay, AoE for Frost is more than one target, so anything beyond one is good by me. But yeah, this serves as like in between both of those things. It's like periodic, like AoE or 2 target sustained or 5 target sustained. I don't know. It's just good.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I won't go into like describing each thing one by one. You can look at it yourself.
Yeah,
I'll
it's
just
just
let you know right now.
disgusting.
The right side of the tree is just every single massive borrowed power AoE thing that made Frost DK like OP, and you get all of it. So it's really weird. You get Chill Streak, you get like Chill Streak on crack with a bonus point, you get Frost Whelps, you get Breath, you get your Frost Worms, you get Reduced Frost Worms, you get Rage of the Frozen Champion, you get the 2 best Remorseless powers that you had over 2 expansions at the same time. You get 2 charges of Empowered Rune Weapon, and you have Resource Generation out the ass. So it's really weird. It's like it's the most overloaded AoE tree I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, and that's when I first read this, I thought that a lot of trees were going to be like this and I don't know how many of them are going to be able to accomplish it as much as a very clear split down the middle AoE and single target thing. Like it just seems everything on the right side of this tree is cleave, and every point you take to grab something else makes sense for what you're grabbing. It's not like you're taking. It's not like imagine if this improved rhyme here was just like improved frost strike. You would hate that, right? There's a ton of points like that in trees that exist right now, and the frost one, in my opinion, at least for the AoE, like I only did an AoE Mythic Plus build, and I was just like, man, you can kind of just get everything you want. And you might really suck ass on bosses. I mean, it might be rough on the boss, but you will absolutely crank everything in the dungeon outside of that. This was a tree I really liked, and especially that you don't take Frost Scythe. That was like kind of something I wanted to talk about in AoE. I think DK AoE without Frost Scythe is so much more fun.
I hate Frost Scythe personally. I know people loved it in Mythic Plus and spamming it on AoE, but I think it's boring.
Yeah,
So,
hate it.
Not my favorite. The one thing I don't like about the Frost Tree in general is you're forced to take Unleash Frenzy on the left side towards the top, where Frost Strike increases your strength, stacking up to 3 times for a limited window. And like in AoE scenarios where you're playing Breath, you're not proccing that, and that's been a problem. It was one of the conduits that was in this expansion, and you never played it. But you have to take that if you want Rage of the Frozen Champion, which is like unbelievably good. So that feels kind of weird. It's kind of like a dead point. Not too big of a deal though, because it's not like you're giving anything up for it, because you just get everything you'd ever want. I like Frost. I like Breath. I like Cleaving. So I'm liking what I'm seeing here. However, does it make sense for it to be like this? No, not really. You get like 4 legendaries, 2 of your best conduits, and an essence all at the same time. and that's like an unbelievable amount of like class power for
Yeah,
like
but
a
you're also
specific
giving
niche.
up an entire tree of single target. And why I think
good.
that this is going to work out actually well in its current form is in a lot of raid fights, which are almost exclusively not single target. Single target fights in raids are pretty rare, where there's truly only one. Having to decide exactly how far you go down this in a raid environment is very interesting, I think, because like and I think that this, of all the specs released so far, I could see Frost having the most variations in a raid fight of any spec tree I've seen, and I think that if what they're going for is perfect, and it has so many strong, it looks so strong. Like you can go all the way down the single target tree basically and still get like Chill Streak, for example, which is just like insane for so many raid fights. Even if it's an ad that spawns on the boss every minute or something, that's like an incredible 1 point, like as good as any classes, or I guess 2 points as any class is going to get. So I was really happy to see this, and I'm interested to see kind of where the single target goes, or if any of you guys have any more takes on the AoE.
Just another word on like the general tree itself, not necessarily just like full-blown AoE, but full-blown single target, but like the spec and the talent tree. When it comes to making decisions between how you allocate points, if you look at like different types of fights, different types of damage profiles, there's a lot of flexibility within this tree where you'd actually make those meaningful decisions. Like let's say there's like a target that spawns every 45 seconds, then you can grab Chill Streak and still have your single target build. And then your general tree also gives you 2-target D&D cleave. If you don't want that, don't spec into it. You can go into like full AoE, you can go into full single target. So I think they did a really good job in that regard. The only thing I'm scared for is tuning, because the right side when it comes to AoE is just like it's unfucking believable how strong you'll be on AoE, but maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's gonna be an
basically,
issue too.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Concern though, for the people, two-handed being a talent. I know a lot of people want to play two-hand. I know a lot of people like playing it, but it being a talent also seems like it kind of sucks for some. Yeah, you have to spend you have to spend a talent point.
Where
just
is
to be
that on
able
the
to
tree?
play
I actually
duel.
forget.
Left
left
side
middle.
below killing machine. So you have to use a talent point just to be able to play two-hand. And I know like that's gonna suck for a lot of people because they love playing two-hand.
Well, the good thing about the talent trees is that there's no proper build, and you don't have to make choices on cookie cutter builds, and you can in theory craft your own stuff. So it's very.
I would
fluid
actually
and
argue
dynamic.
that I don't know how else they could have done it other than just taking that point off the tree entirely. Maybe that's what you're leveraging for, being that you could just make that choice now, and it's just you make the choice by equipping a weapon, not by picking a talent. But the argument outside of that is imagine how bad it would be if it was on the road to something you would also want as dual wield, right? That would be the worst, right? Where you have to pick Might of the Frozen, and other classes have shit like this, where you would have to pick Might of the Frozen Wastes to get like Bone Grinder or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, what if I want Bone Grinder and dual wield, right? So I don't know how bad it would be, other than I do agree that maybe if you could just make the choice by equipping your weapon instead of a talent point, that makes sense.
I could see it going before obliteration, if anything, and just like move ice cap over to somewhere else.
Okay, let's look at a single target before we go. So yeah, we all agree that obviously Frosty KAOE is completely fucking cracked.
I think the simplest way to kind of bring it down that makes the most sense though is just take a little bit of the power out of Remorseless Winter and all the abilities that buff it right now. Because right now it's just so absurd in both AoE and single target. Bringing that back to a more reasonable place will definitely help bring it in line AoE wise.
Yeah, I was gonna say for M plus specifically. So my problem with this is usually what happens because of tuning, where like let's say we're nerfing a bunch of the stuff on the right side, is that like the right side will still own really hard, assuming it's nerfed, and it's gonna be like super good in raid where it's a specific niche fight. Like let's say Lords of Dread, you go some right path, you would absolutely crush that boss. But it'd be one of those cases where the class is tuned where you would have that stuff being specific for AoE situations, and then your single target would probably be really doo-doo. But if you go down more on the left side, your single target would be good, but your AoE sucks. And that's generally fine in raid, because in raid you would just go, all right, like in this fight I'll just go down this path, and in this fight I'll go down this path. But in M plus you can only play one specific build, right? Where you're usually fighting for like a single target or an AoE ability. And that's why, like, historically, you have classes that perform really well by just playing one build. Like, mages and rogues generally have those type of one-type build. And I don't really know if Frost will be able to achieve that, where you have, like, a really good one-type build.
Yeah. Oh wait, I'm actually surprised. This The single target tree you linked me doesn't look really much different at all. It's like 5 points on the dude. They're going to be so insanely good.
It really is.
Wait, I'm like, yeah, it's the same as mine as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it basically just you're still focusing on the same things. You're taking all the remorseless winter buffing stuff and then going as far down the single target path as you can to get all the obliteration, improving stuff, and the icy citadel replacement. I can't remember what it's called right now. Unleash strength or something, or enduring strength. Yeah, but it's really, really similar. You give up like Frostworm, you give up Chill Streak, but that's really about it.
If you're just transition this into a 2-target boss or a 2-target raid boss, what 2 points do you drop for Chill Streak?
Actually,
I think.
quite a lot.
Enduring
I mean,
strength.
2 points
you-
you would
you-
give up. I would probably give up enduring.
Yeah, I don't know. My personal take is for 2-target right now. I'm kind of on the boat of two-handed obliteration, looking really good for it. So you got Glacial Advance to replace Razor Ice. You have Chill Streak right there, which you can use anytime with obliteration, or you can't with Breath. 2-target Cleave in the talent tree. You get the double charge of Death and Decay. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff for two-hand obliteration and 2-target Cleave. Not sure if it'll be the best, but I'm hopeful at least.
Quick question for single target and AoE stuff. Are you guys taking 2 charges of Impaired Rune Weapon with the 1 point?
Yeah.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
are? It's
It's
interesting.
unbelievably good. Yeah. It gives haste too. That it doesn't just give resources.
Oh, did they make it the
15%
conduit version?
haste. Yeah.
Well, it's always been
It-
that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It,
Okay.
it's good.
The only thing I could see it maybe not having as much value over like a super long fight, right? Because like in reality, it's basically like in Lust you get in Lust on the opener you're getting an extra use of Empowered Rune Weapon. You're not ever really letting it stack. Assuming this is Breath, right? Like you're not letting it stack to 2 outside of that. So does another point over an entire fight give you more value than the extra singular use of Empowered Rune Weapon?
Situational. Just depends on how the
Which is
fight's
good
designed.
though, right? That
Yeah.
it's good that it's
really
situational.
good.
Like yeah, like that's the exact kind of stuff you want. Is if it's just no, you're taking this whole expansion, then maybe that isn't as good always. Even though probably 60 to 70% of these talents will be taking the whole expansion, but that in reality you're not gonna. It would be worse if realistically you could pick anything on the tree at all times, and you'd just be constantly. It'd be like going to Cheesecake Factory, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's why the frost tree's really good in terms of like making you pick between different things. It's because everything on the tree is just good. You're not really picking between things that are dead or things that you wouldn't want. You'd want everything on that tree in some sort of scenario. And then the reason why you're making choices is because the scenario is changing, which is not the case with Unholy. Unholy has like a bunch of things that feel bad to take, or you don't have enough points to grab all of them. But like this one, you do have enough points to grab all the things you would want for your specific scenario. I do have a gripe with the Chill Streak improving talent though, because there's 2 options there. It's in a choice node, and it's not a choice. Mathematically, there's just a superior option. The first option, Piercing Chill, increases 5% per hit, and there's 9 total hits. It bounces 9 times, so it's 10 total hits. But the second one, if it procs once, it's 100% extra damage to that Chill Streak because you just procced an extra hit. So why would you ever take the one that baby buffs it if you have 9 individual chances for it to just proc a second hit? I think they need to look at that one. It's because, I mean, their design intention behind the choice nodes is like situationally, you change it depending on something, like you still want it. It's like a fundamental thing that augments something, but in different scenarios, you'll want to change it. This one, you'll never change it. You'll always take Enduring Chill no matter what.
So I think the solution to that is just to buff Piercing Chill, because like I think the way it can be a cool choice is. Let's just say a raid fight, for example, not Mythic Plus. You have an ad that needs to die at a certain time every time, and if Piercing Chill was mathed out to be on average 2 procs, right, or the damage of like 2 procs just all the time, but it's consistent, that might be like on this fight, it's like we need this every time. Like we might actually wipe if it doesn't proc, and it doesn't really matter if we overkill it; it just has to die, right? Like those are decisions that absolutely should matter. And so yeah, it would just be a buffing of that, but I completely agree with you.
Well, I'm psychotic. My proposed change that I thought about is a little OP, but it would be fun. I think that Piercing Chill should be buffed numbers wise to just increase the amount of damage per hit, but the second one should be changed so that Chill Streak has a chance to split, and then it just continues the number of bounces that it would have had, but in a mass AoE scenario, if
That's
you get
fucking lit.
lucky, If you get
Yeah, that's
lucky,
2
it
RNG
splits
though.
early.
That's 2 RNG, dude. That's like
No, that's fun. That's so fun. Imagine you throw a chill streak and your first bounce splits, and then the next one splits, and then the next one splits, and it's just splitting like 20 times, and it's bouncing all over the place. That'd be sick.
yeah.
You're insane, Atlas.
Yeah,
But
Yeah,
that sounds
yeah,
fun.
that's definitely a spicy one. I
You'd
will
see
say
that, and you'd pog in real life. You know,
yeah,
that'd be
yeah,
sick.
exactly. You would, but like I guess the only to support his point, I think like the things in the game that are super RNG AOE wise, what makes a lot of them not fun is how it makes you change your character. Like look at Dance of Chi-Chi procs, right? Like probably the biggest example of this. That makes you continue have to like I guess not in the Necrolord situation where they just use Bone Dust Brew. Like outside of Bone Dust Brew, you just always have to use it, and because you could proc it again and lose a proc. With Chill Streak, it wouldn't actually change the way you play. You're pressing the one button every single time, no matter what, and it just has a chance to pop the fuck off. I think that's a more acceptable version of RNG than the one that makes you change the way you're playing your character a lot. Same way we were talking about with Unholy, with Festering. Like, the fact that it changes the decisions you make and playing in a negative way is bad. I think Frost fucking owns. My only question is, you guys, same thing we did with Unholy, is there anything on this tree that right now you would basically take never for any reason for the entire expansion, so Blizzard would know to work on it or just look at it in general or change its spot?
I would have said Runic Command, but Atlas picked that, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I like it.
Which is the
Yeah.
In mass AOE.
Oh, in your first
assuming
build?
that assuming that you're heavy cleaving, and then you're also in the general tree taking giving you runic power and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty weak, like in terms of like usefulness
especially as
in
a
most
2-point
scenarios.
talent. I think it'd be
Yeah.
way more acceptable if it gave you 10 for a 1. I think that's like that would make way more sense.
Yeah.
Yep. The only other one that comes to mind for me is Frigid Executioner, which competes with Rage of the Frozen Champion. It's basically Coltiers right now, which doesn't even compete, but nerfed even more. I don't really get it.
I
Okay.
forgot that was a choice note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That Rage is so insane.
Okay, I'm gonna say it, man. I'm controversial. Okay, I have to preface this though. The last time I said this, people got really mad at me because I said it in a joking manner. I'm down for two-handed. Okay, let me make that known. I'm totally cool with two-hander. If you want to play two-hander, that's all good too. Good for you. I'm just gonna pick what's mathematically better. Between dual wield and two-handed, there's a mathematically better one, always. So it could just be a dead talent if it's not tuned well. It hasn't been tuned well since it's been introduced into the game. So I don't really see the point. But if you want to pick it just for fun and run around with a two-hander, live your life. In terms of like actual design behind how the class performs in like a raid setting, I have a problem with this talent personally because I think that it's wasting a talent point if it just ends up not being better because of tuning. But they could just change tuning to make it good. So like I guess it justifies its spot on the tree. But yeah.
Yeah, I've never really understood that. If the point of being able to two-hand as a Frost DK is just to give you more flexibility with obtaining weapons, but they chose to make it, a pretty different playstyle, as opposed to like maybe Windwalker, for example, right? Like you can wear one-handers or a stave or like a polearm, but that doesn't really change the way you play. It's just like a damage calculation, and for a while two-handers were bad, but I think recently they were better again. So I wonder if you feel that and you feel like the other playstyle isn't as good, if maybe just giving you the option to run more weapons as a Frost DK. Because I think something else that is totally different from any talent is I think it's kind of weird that, like, is the Frost DK weapon the hardest one to get in the game in a raid?
Yeah.
By
the
far?
only people that can trade it to you are tanks. If you're playing those tanks.
If you're playing those tanks, exactly. Like I think that's something that should really be looked at with things like single-minded fury with warriors, and just in general of the few specs that can wield multiple weapons. Not every weapon is the same in terms of requiring them, and you can make that better by giving them just an option to wear two-handed without it changing their playstyle.
The shitty part about it too is it does, like, the two-handed thing is stronger in scenarios where you're playing at obliteration and you're changing your playstyle to accommodate for the two-hander. But it's even worse than if you just play that same build with dual-wielded weapons. So it's like that's my issue with the tuning aspect of it. It's like, why introduce that as like a route that you could take? Like in an ideal world, slap on the two-hander, play obliteration for single target. It's the best performing spec. But like in reality, even if you were to play obliteration, you'd still use dual-wielded. It's just better. So they need to like kind of look at that.
They just need to. I mean, I would just suggest changing this talent to say increases obliteration damage by 30% and cause your next auto attack crit to grant killing machine. I don't even know why two-handed weapon has to be involved at all, and just make two-handed weapons work for everything with it. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the DK community likes the fact that the weapon determines the different build than the talent point. Who knows?
I don't know. I'm scared of the two-handed people. They clobbered me last time I fucking talked about it. So.
Oh, they get mad at you?
They
Yeah,
cover anyone that
well-
talks anything about it.
Oh
Well,
shit,
I-
my
I
bad.
might have not
okay,
presented
I
it
take it
well.
all back.
I
didn't
I
mean
might
it.
have made fun of them a little bit. I didn't mean it. It was a joke.
Yes, you did. So you do you guys see yourself playing Ice Cap ever?
Maybe. Like, there's a chance it could be good in like a full Gigamind AoE Mythic Plus scenario where you do just absolutely healer, like Druid healer damage on a boss. If you want to do that, you totally can. I don't know if it's going to be good, but it's totally an option.
Good. I want to move on to Blood, and if anyone in the call for whatever reason knows nothing about Blood and does not care about being a part of the conversation, you can leave. I did this last time when we swapped roles, but I assume a lot of you are, almost all of you except for Taeznak actually. So it's Taeznak if you want to stick around, perfectly fine, or if you have any input. And all right, let's move on. Does anyone have a Blood tree? This is probably have to split it between Rated Mythic Plus and then talk about the differences. Does anyone have one of those made? When I briefly looked through this, I know that it appeared like you had the opportunity to get the current playstyle pretty easily. And then there was also a lot of really hard choices. Like the only choice that didn't seem that hard was like, it seems like you're probably not going to pick Bone Storm. I feel like Red Thirst is just like too free. And then like going down the right side, there's not like an easy way to get to it. But I'd be interested to see what you guys have.
No,
I
yeah,
really
you really
like
want the
that
dancing
they,
stuff.
I really like that they made Death's Crest generate Bone Shield. That's
Yep.
nice.
Yep. Amen. That was the first thing I saw when I did this was the amount of times you have to you want to generate AoE on a pack as soon as you pull. And you have to mirror rend one thing just to not get globaled at the beginning. Actually, this is different with the current tier. And then before you start blood boiling, but be able to go in with Bone Shield immediately and just be able to start AoEing is so good, even just for threat.
I have a weird build.
How weird.
Here's sort of what I have as a baseline.
Look at his.
Oh, it's
mine's
28
mine's
of
all over
30.
the place.
Okay, here we go. Oh, so you you left 2 points unspent on purpose, I assume.
Yeah, because this is weird. Like it's like, do you go for Death's Caress or Red First or Blood Tap?
Yeah, it's crazy to think that the Death's Caress talent is actually just obtaining Death's Caress at all. That's probably why they added the Bone Shield charge to it, because it would feel terrible to take as a point without it. But it also goes down to Heartbreaker too. Like Heartbreaker is pretty good generation through a key, but it looks like you can't get that.
Well, the thing is, right now we're gonna have a crap ton of resources as a Blood DK. Like from what I've heard, you're basically gonna be an infinite resource DK, a Blood DK, which is unheard of early in expansion. Because normally what happens is you enter a new expansion, you're playing Blood, and it feels slow as hell. Your resource generation is really slow. Your death strikes matter a ton. But because we have all the Frost stuff in the class tree, we can actually probably get away with not playing as many resource generating stuff that are normally really important for Blood DK.
Yeah, Blood DK is probably the hardest tank to tune in the game, because as opposed to a lot of the other ones where it's they have their active mitigation charges, and a lot of the cooldowns are pretty similar, but the way it actually does its active mitigation is something that, with runic power being in flux at the beginning of every expansion, the value of haste, they can just become extremely self-sufficient very quickly. There's been very few times in this game where they were just completely self-sufficient without a healer. I think the last time was the end of Legion, right, where they were actually just solo tanking keys with 4 DPS multiple times, and no other tank could do that, right? I don't know if they've ever gotten to that point again.
Wait, Atlas's build looks so much better.
Atlas's build looks better.
Mine's a general purpose kind of live your life kind of thing.
Wait, you like Unquenchable Thirst? Let's see.
Yeah, that sounds sick.
It sounds like something that would be really good on a raid boss that imagine the amount of healing you do with the jailer dot through a vamp, and it's only hitting one target. It would just destroy it.
Well, you don't get the jailer dot, but yeah. It has the potential to be really good, but it might be useless in some scenarios if you're not taking enough damage. But I don't know. It's a general purpose build.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be between this and Purg.
Yeah, Purg is weird.
Because you have to take the Tightening Grasp, which is very weird.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird because it's a 3-point commitment. At least in raiding for a while, Purg Actually, I don't know. Do people run Purg in this expansion? Like during all of BFA, running Purg was wrong.
People do it
as a
on
blood
Raglan.
DK. They do it on Raglan. Yeah, just it's basically things that could just kill you out of nowhere, and it's just worth it.
Yeah, it's mostly an M plus thing.
Yeah, I think like M plus makes sense because like in raid, the alternative being Red Thirst, there's just sometimes where having your vamp blood off cooldown earlier actually doesn't matter because like there's like big parts of the fight where you need vamp, and then sometimes having it off cooldown 30 seconds before that doesn't matter. Where
Red Thirst is just too good. It's always been too good since it's been put in the game.
Yeah.
It just gives you so much flexibility, like in terms of like when you want to use vamp. Other times you'd like would look at vamp and you'd be like, well, I want to use it here, but like, what if something goes wrong like a minute and 30 seconds from now, and I don't have that option available? It's kind of like a get out of jail free card. It's like you can be way more flexible while you're learning damage intake. I don't know. It's just too good.
I feel like you're never gonna take Death's Caress if you have the ability to get the 5 bone shield things from Rune Weapon, because you're either
It's not worth Death's Caressing.
yeah, like you're gonna have bone shield leaving a pack, and on the packs where you don't, or at the beginning or after you die or something, you have weapon. So it should that just can't be worth a talent point, especially if the thing.
Although,
go ahead.
the more I think about it, though, I feel like you might have a lot of issues grouping up mobs sometimes. Like, I'm just trying to think of some certain setup pulls where it just becomes way clunkier not having Death's Caress.
Honestly, you
Because you only have a limited amount of range pulls.
I mean,
probably just not take unquenchable thirst.
yeah, you
from
just
the
don't
team.
take unquenchable. That's the only thing. Ossuary's too strong. My only thing with this is it looks like it doesn't look like there's a lot of choices. You also took consumption. Do people take that now? Do they buff
I
that?
just slammed that in there for fun, but like one's AoE, one single target. So
Yeah, that's kind of whatever. You probably just go for Blood Drinker, but I don't think it matters too much.
If you have an insane amount of runic power generation, it's possible that you just don't go to ossuary. You don't have to go through this bad node, and you could, I guess, skip blood tap, and then like I wonder if those 3 points actually gets you anything meaningful anywhere. Gets you
the
per.
scary thing about
Improved
not
vamp
taking
blood is kinda nice.
ossuary is is it 10 runic power now? Oh, never mind.
Ooh, improved vamp blood is also duration
well,
too.
Yeah, no, actually no. Ossuary is really situationally good because it lets you bank 3 death strikes if you need 3 death strikes back to back to back. If you don't take ossuary, you can't do that. You only have 2. So
Yeah.
you run the risk of, let's say you need 3 death strikes and you only have 2 in your bank, and then you die between generating for your third kind of shit. It's just throughput wise very safe. But like with Crimson Rune Weapon and Tombstone, and the fact that you still get both of those in the tree without really giving up much, in keys at least, or in non-challenging content, maybe you can give away ossuary, but it seems like a mistake in my eyes to give that up.
Are you missing a good bit of damage from the current build now to this?
You don't have heart
No,
strike
not
damage
really.
in this tree, but it's not that big of a deal. I think a majority of your damage actually comes from the general tree, because you can take a lot of throughput boosting things in there. Like you can have Soul Reaper, you can have Limb, you can have a bunch of like strength modifying things within that general tree as well.
Can you have you done a like blood general tree real quick? I actually kind of want to see what that looks like, because I think the ones you guys linked me didn't have it. I can do it real quick, because I wonder what you're actually going to take. Do you think you take A bombs with mass grip?
I think
I
you
think
avoid
so.
A-bombs unless you need it.
What about
Because
Yeah,
you're gonna go for
say-
improved Death Strike anyways. You might as well just spend the
Oh,
one
we
extra
never
point.
talked about assimilation. The 100 rune power in gain from dropping AMZ. I think like obviously Blood Decay survivability and Frost Decay breath are like the 2 things that immediately come to mind to be useful for that with the Death Knight class. Have you guys thought about that at all?
I think it's
It-
extremely broken for Frost. But the other 2 specs, it's kind of whatever.
All right, I'm making this. So you're definitely taking the Death Strike. Oh, the thing is, you're taking the Death Strike for sure, right? And then it's like A bombs limb becomes a 1-point situation. That might be
Yeah,
too. That
exactly.
might be too good. And then also Death's Echo as a point. You're not. So wait, so you're not taking Empowered Rune Weapon, are you?
You are. You have to. I mean, I think it's just way too good to not take.
What are you dropping to get it?
It'd probably be something like. Let me see.
All right, I got one.
Yeah, show me that actually, because like right now I'm missing a lot of stuff.
This is sort of what I've had right now.
So just ignoring Soul Reaper. Yeah, you said like you could like get some points in the tree through Soul Reaper, dude. I don't think you're ever getting Soul Reaper as a Blood Decay.
No shot.
But the thing is Death's Echo. I feel like Death's Echo as a Blood Decay would almost be worth the 1 point as much as Soul Reaper, maybe even more.
I think you definitely take Soul Reaper in a raid. But,
Yeah, yeah.
Which is good, because then you have choices again that you have to make within the tree.
Oh, you linked one for Bone Storm. Do you think you'd play Bone Storm?
So like the thing I'm kind of worried about is, aggro issue, as I'm sure you're fully aware of. Like, cause like we're losing a lot of power going into next expansion, right? And it's gonna get especially bad because we have like nothing for AoE threat generation, and Bone Storm could be like a potential gold.
Well, I guess the reason that Bone Storm has always felt bad over the years, for sure, is that you've been losing Red Thirst or Purg depending on the content, but now you don't necessarily have to make that choice. It looks like in every build you guys have got the whole Dancing Rune Weapon current tier set up. That's probably something you're not going to go away from. That just seems super good.
It's RNG survivability, but the impact that it has is like super, super, super good. Way more in keys because you're pairing way more individual hits, but even in raids, like parry, completely negating an attack, especially from like somebody that has like extremely large melees, like Jailer, is too good to give up when you consider how long it extends.
Trying to like picture DK's power level with this. It seems like Blood DK is going to be really strong. Like it seems
Yeah,
like
I think it's probably gonna be borderline broken.
like defensively it seems like it's got all the stuff.
It's the same thing of we're used to going into expansions and acquiring power over several patches when they keep giving us new shiny things, and then now they've took all the shiny things that we had and they just slapped it in a tree and we can grab most of it.
That's so funny because a lot of classes that's not true. A lot of classes like well, I guess there's only been a few, but like a few spec trees have been most of their points just getting shit that they have, and they're definitely not able to get a bunch of new stuff they don't have currently. So I think DK specifically Frost and Blood seem like they have so many options. I mean, Unholy probably has options too. It's just that the spec has much more flawed things going on. But the thing is with Blood though is you could like I really like the fact that Asphyxiate is an option. I like the fact that Anti-Magic Barrier is an option because those are definitely like per fight, per dungeon things. Sometimes they matter, sometimes they don't. Even the kick one, like the Mind Freeze giving you 10 runic power and reducing your cooldown by 3 seconds. That's something where it kind of sucks for DPS DK because there's so much stuff to get in this tree. But I mean, that's a 12-second kick, right? That is very powerful. There's a lot of things that shamans can kick right now that no one else can. All right, this will work.
Be nice.
All right, here we go. Raid build, so no A-bombs, getting Unholy Bond, Death's Echo, and Soul Reaper with Empowered Rune Weapon. Don't have a stun. Don't have Wraith Walk. Yeah, this is probably what you'd do. No Blinding Sleet, obviously. Yeah, this is and obviously the 1 point missing is maybe Horn of Winter. Horn of Winter doesn't seem bad at all. Like I guess is it on the GCD actually?
Horn of Winter is really OP. The runes and runic power are really big for Blood DK.
Yeah, so like in this, there's a lot of things you could swap. You could grab like 1 point Horn of Winter, 1 point Runic Attenuation. You could grab a stun. Grabbing a stun for a Blood DK feels really bad. Also, you didn't grab Improved Death Strike. Do you think that's the move?
Yeah, I think it's fine. This is like I'm gonna pop off. I'm gonna do a lot of damage as a Blood DK. This is like grabbing the.
If you're not worried about. Yeah.
I think the improved set strike is just situational, like depending on how much damage intake you need or you're taking.
Even just as a 1 point though, just for the reduction, right? Potentially, but the fact that you have to get assimilation for it is kind of weird. There's definitely gonna be situations where assimilation is probably really fucking good. It's just that one issue I had with this in the general tree initially for any spec, specifically Frost DKs, is I feel like it's a really weird decision to make as a player where you are feeling bad that you're using AMZ to help your raid live in part of the fight. And it's bad for your breath versus always trying to AMZ during your damage, like turning AMZ into a damage cooldown. I think there's always a really weird dynamic that happens between groups and players when you have to make those kind of choices. But that hasn't really been something that people have sounded off about, and I think it's primarily because it's just kind of in the way, you know? Like it's in the way for Blood DK and it's in the way for DPS DK to get A-bomb, so. All right, hell yeah. Do you guys have anything else about DK in general, or just anything you guys see on these trees that we haven't talked about that you think is a problem, or even that you think is specifically really good?
A problem is, I mean, not necessarily, I don't know if I would call it a problem. The rune node on the general tree is, I don't really feel like it's a choice node. You have runic empowerment and runic corruption, right? You would never take runic corruption.
Yeah.
For resource generation.
So that's a runic corruption buff situation, or just removing it and adding another thing. And even if they buffed it to be equal to runic empowerment as far as generation, even though that's kind of weird to see how those two things would be equal, but it's still a weird choice because you're just picking between two different ways to get the same resource generation, when I think the idea should be picking between resource generation and maybe something else, right? Or a different resource. Yeah, I agree with you. Anything else?
That's just me being a little bit weird. Assimilation increases damage absorbed by AMC. Is that 10% increase, making it go up to 30% of your health? Or is it a 10% increase, making it 22% of your health? Because right now it can disappear in an instant, just being 20% of your health.
Yeah, I think they should maybe go back and look at that again, because I think I actually read something the other day on Wowhead, like the Rogue Guide Writer came up with the things he'd like to see on the tree or things added back to Rogue and Dragonflight, and obviously one of those things was Smoke Bomb, and then it just comes to the point where it's like, okay, if like every melee now just has like a, you know, a like some AoE raid damage reduction type thing, that's like kind of homogenized and stale and ways to deal with that. I think assimilation might be Blizzard's way of being like, oh, this is how this is different. Like it's not as big of an absorb, but it works. I think AMZ definitely, I think this was actually said right when it was nerfed, is that I think AMZ should have definitely been nerfed from what it was before. Everyone would agree with that. But it should probably be better than it is now, specifically for DPS players, I think. Oh yeah, one thing from the beginning that just to like bring up again is the just mass grip kind of instead of A-Bomb's Limb, because currently it doesn't look like a lot of people are picking that. It might just kind of sit there the whole expansion.
I just wish there was something within the general talent tree that made it so that DPS DKs didn't feel inferior to blood DKs when it came to gripping, because it's like the class identity, it's like the class spell, it's like why you bring a DK to begin with is like for that specific utility, and it's like why would you ever bring a DPS DK when the option is just slot a blood one and they do it better. I wish there was something like within the tree that just reduced the cooldown of grip for like the DPS specs.
Just make grip universally the same cooldown, the blood DK one. That would
like one being half cooldown is like cool for like a trait, I guess, to like make them stand out. But when it comes to raids, it feels really shitty knowing that yours is twice the cooldown of the blood one. And then honestly, like mass grip being back as like a talent that you can slot in somewhere like in the middle area would be really good.
The thing with grip being shorter is I would imagine this is part of the issue with these trees, is that in a lot of the nerfs and balance patches Blizzard has done recently, they've made a point to make sure people knew they were for PvP or for PvE. The issue with these talent trees is that they are definitely trying to do both things in one. And I think there are a lot of conflicting decisions that they would make because they're trying to do both in one. And I think the grip cooldown is one of them. I could already hear PvPers being upset that a DPS DK's grip is a 15-second cooldown, for example.
Yeah, I was about to say, that'd be really bad.
It's the same thing with the Shadow Priest thing, right? Where like Shadow Priest had Disperse in their tree and it like looks like they're not taking it. It's like, oh, put it in the class tree. It's like, okay, I think honestly the game wouldn't be broken, and I promise you Healer Priest could really use Dispersion in PvE. But that would be absolutely ridiculous in PvP, and that's almost certainly the reason that would never happen. So, and I know it's probably way too late to consider fixing this, and I doubt they would do it any other way, but I think there's always just going to be small problems with classes that can't be addressed because they're trying, even though they're two very different games, they're trying to make this system for both of them at the same time.
We criticize where Limb is on the tree and how we would never pick it, but I bet the PvP people are screeching that we're not taking A-Bomb's Limb. I guarantee you they're all going to pick that, so maybe that's a good thing as well. They at least have the choice that they're taking A-Bomb's Limb and they don't see any value in Soul Reaper at all. Yeah,
they're definitely do like a middle one on the left.
How do you guys feel about
like the stuff on the right looks kind of useless?
How do you guys feel about breath in general in the class, both in its current spot for Frost, the playstyle of it compared to having it versus not having it, and also the prospects of, you know, potentially having breath for all three specs again by having it be in the class tree instead of the spec?
Well, yeah, that was gonna be my hot take. My hot take was that as long as breath exists for Frost DK, the spec will probably never really be good in M+. Like I think breath is just way too problematic. The fact that it's a real, especially a really long breath. Like right now, we can maintain breath for like almost 2 minutes depending on the fight. I think it's just a big problem because all your damage is baked into that window. If you ever fuck that window up, you're completely screwed on damage. Not only at on a really high level, in a really high level, let's say you play your breaths good 90% of the time. That's not good enough because, you know, M+ is all about consistency. You would much rather have a class like a Windwalker or a Fire Mage who's like, you know, doing their burst damage in a 10-second window with just pressing their Bone Dust and proccing GG, all that stuff.
Yeah, also think about how hard it is in comparison. Like dropping Bone Dust and spinning Crane Cooking over and over again for 10 seconds versus like It's like Halandris. It's like the Halandris melee versus ranged meme video. Do you guys know which one I'm talking about? Where like the melee player's like
Yeah.
sweating and like has a distorted mic, and the range player is like
Yep.
the stable Ronaldo guy singing that's Maroon 5 song. Yeah, that's like that. Like when you're like trying to maintain your breath at the end and like trying to salvage it is just like that's all you're thinking about, and like it's just it can cause problems. Yeah.
And it's
Right.
especially bad if you somehow lose it early on, because like, unlike like in raid, it's pre-scripted, right? You know exactly when you can breath and like what's gonna happen, what mechanics are happening. In M plus, like shit happens, right? You've been in Arkeys Max where like either you rip aggro or like the tank is like running all over the place, or like one of the mobs doesn't get CC'd, or I don't know, you somehow have to B-res someone. Worst case scenario, it's like, dude, I am not gonna B-res someone in my breath. Or like if
The
you're
only
having to
case
use
is
like
like
blinding
pressing
sleep and
tank.
stuff. Yeah. And I think that type of playstyle will just never effectively work in M plus. And like the only time Frost was ever good in M plus was when Ice Cap was a thing in the end of BFA, and Frost DK was OP as hell at the time. They were actually like topping a lot of dungeons in single target and AOE.
Oh yeah, gripping off the GCD is another one. It just
Yes,
doesn't.
please.
Yeah, it's like it feels weird to complain about it because it doesn't like really affect really any situations where you can grip. But man, is it just like why not? Like it would change nothing. It would be so much better. Definitely do that.
Yeah. Only thing I really have like hot take wise is I'd rather see Soul Reaper replaced with Army of the Dead. Like for Frost DK, they're never really going to use Soul Reaper. The opportunity cost is too high. Why not just throw Army in there? It'd be way cooler for all three specs.
Hard agree. This is actually a
Yeah.
great idea at the end of this thing. Fucking hot take time. Who's got some absolute spice? Atlas usually has some spicy ones.
I'm tame now. I present my ideas in a well-educated and thoughtful manner after I've been lashed at.
Dude, what happened to you? Did you just like have a bad take about like DKs and they just got mad at you or something?
No, I've matured as a person. I found myself in the last year, and I've decided that hurting others is not a good idea.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Yep, got it, man. All right, cool. I think we're good. I think we kind of got through all of it. Thank you guys for coming on. And if we may do if they ever like heavily revise the tree, we might like do a shorter one of these again. That would be fun. So thanks for talking with me as always, guys. And then Muffin, nice meeting you and having you on here. And I'll probably just leave this Discord channel open too if you guys just ever want to like randomly talk about DK stuff or anything gets posted. So all right, thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks
Yeah,
for having
thanks.
me.
Yep.
Deuces.